In country music, there is a story of a great but forgotten collaboration. Everyone knows Joe Maphis, the king of strings with his unique double neck guitar. But few know Rose Lee Maphis, the wife and partner who together created one of the most famous singing duos in history. While Joe was hailed as a lightning bolt, Rose Lee was the solid ground, the metronome, and the harmony voice that brought their music to life. However, when history was rewritten, Rose Lee was all but erased. She was remembered as a sidekick, a wife who quietly stood behind her husband's success. This article will take you through the story of Rose Lee, the forgotten half of Mr. and Mrs. Country Music, who lived 35 years after her husband's death to quietly preserve their shared legacy. This is the story of a great woman who was hidden in the shadow of the man she loved. To understand the artist Rose Lee Maphis became, you have to understand the world that forged her. And it wasn't Nashville. It wasn't even the Deep South. Rose Lee Maphis was born in 1922 in Maryland. This was a different kind of rural. It wasn't the Mississippi Delta or the plains of Texas. It was the borderlands of Appalachia, a place of deep valleys and coal towns, dominated by the church, hard labor, and the ancient folk music traditions carried over from the British Isles. Two forces defined her youth as they did her entire generation. The first was the absolute economic devastation of the Great Depression. This was not an abstract concept, it was daily reality. For young people in rural America, a career wasn't about following your passion. It was about finding a path, any path, that didn't lead to the fields or the mines. The second force provided that escape. It was, in the 1930s, pure magic. It was the wooden box in the parlor that hummed to life, pulling voices, stories, and music out of the thin air, the radio. In the 1930s and early 1940s, before television saturated the culture, and long before the record industry was consolidated into the machine we know today, radio was the lifeblood of rural America. Radio stars were often bigger than recording stars. Hillbilly music, the blunt catch-all term for everything from Appalachian string bands, sentimental parlor songs, cowboy ballads, and Southern gospel, was not a centralized industry. It was a sprawling network of regional kingdoms. High-wattage AM stations held dominion over the airwaves. At night, their clear channel signals could travel hundreds, even thousands of miles. There was the National Barn Dance broadcast from WLS in Chicago, the Wheeling Jamboree from WWVA in West Virginia, and of course the powerhouse that was the Grand Ole Opry from WSM in Nashville. These programs were more than just entertainment. They were the social fabric. They were sponsored by brands that became household names, like Martha White Flour or Black Draft Laxative. Families gathered around the radio on Saturday night with a reverence that rivaled Sunday morning service. The stars of these shows, people like Roy Acuff, Uncle Dave Macon, or the Carter family, weren't distant celebrities. They felt like extended family members. Voices of comfort and excitement beamed directly into the home. This was the world where Rose Lee Maphis saw her path. This was her only viable exit. She possessed the necessary tools, a clear, powerful, and true voice, and an innate intuitive sense of harmony. Just as importantly, she was not just a singer. She was an instrumentalist. She played the rhythm guitar. This skill cannot be overstated. In an era when most female performers were relegated to the decorative role of the girl singer, a pretty face to stand in front of the all-male band for a sentimental song or two, Rose Lee was a functioning musician. She could accompany herself. She could anchor a band. She possessed the essential workhorse skill that every group needed. She built her career with the methodical patience of a craftsman. She needed a name, a radio-friendly handle. She adopted the perfect moniker, one that radiated the rural warmth and optimism that sponsors craved: Sunshine Ruby. As Sunshine Ruby, she began the hard work of building her own professional career long before the name Maphis ever entered her orbit. She worked the grueling regional circuits, honing her craft on local radio spots and in drafty schoolhouses. Eventually, she landed a secure full-time spot at one of the key hubs on the regional map, radio station WDVA in Danville, Virginia. This was not an amateur hour public access show. WDVA was a powerful and respected station, a magnet for talent from all over Virginia and North Carolina. It was a critical stop on the circuit where artists like the Stanley Brothers, then just starting out, would pass through to perform live. To be a regular featured artist on WDVA's Virginia Barn Dance meant you had made it. This was a real salaried job. Sunshine Ruby was not a hobbyist. She was a broadcast professional. Her life was a grind. She performed live on the air daily. She sang the jingles for local sponsors, reading the ad copy for flower and farm equipment between songs. She read fan mail over the air. And she was a core member of the station's touring review, traveling those winding two-lane roads to play pie socials, fire halls, and VFW auditoriums throughout the territory. By 1948, she was a seasoned veteran, a hardened professional who understood the mechanics of the business, how to work a microphone, how to command a rowdy crowd, and how to operate flawlessly in the high-pressure, split-second timing world of live broadcast radio. She had a career. She was established. She was not looking for a man to get her into the industry. She was already fundamentally in it. And then, in 1948, a bigger star, a true national phenomenon, and veteran of the vaudeville circuits arrived at WDVA to headline their program. His name was O.T. Joseph Maphis, but the whole country already knew him simply as Joe Maphis. Their meeting was not just a romantic encounter. It was a collision of two perfectly complementary professional assets. Joe Maphis wasn't just another performer. He was a whirlwind. He was a genuine virtuoso, a man who had been on the road since childhood and who truly could play anything with strings. He arrived in Danville as the established national headliner, a star of the WLS Barn Dance, a man whose reputation preceded him. Rose Lee, as Sunshine Ruby, was the established, respected local professional. Their chemistry, both personal and musical, was immediate and undeniable. Musically, they were each other's missing piece, the yin and the yang of the country sound. Joe was the innovator, the flashy, chaotic showman. His playing was complex, astonishingly fast, and full of brilliant risks. But Rose Lee possessed the one thing his frantic genius desperately needed: stability. She was the anchor. Her rhythm guitar playing wasn't flashy or complicated, but it was by all accounts flawless. It was a rock-solid alternating bass boom-chuck beat that you could build a cathedral on. Joe's style needed that foundation. Left on its own, his flurry of notes could become messy, nervous, even chaotic. Rose Lee's rhythm provided the framework, the canvas upon which he could explode. And then there were their voices. Joe had a warm, amiable, folksy baritone. Rose Lee possessed that high, piercing Appalachian blade of a voice, a pure tenor that could cut through the densest barroom smoke. When they harmonized, it was electric. Her high harmony soared above his lead, creating the signature brother duet sound. They fell in love quickly and hard. For two career-driven traveling professionals, marriage was more than romance. It was a logistical and business merger. They recognized in each other the partner they needed to achieve the next level of success. They married in 1953, and instantly, Sunshine Ruby vanished. Her solo identity, Her professional moniker was submerged. From that moment forward, the world would know them only as a single unit, Joe and Rose Lee Maphis. Their very first major decision as a duo would define their entire career, taking them far from the established path. Instead of heading back to Nashville, where Joe was already a respected member of the Grand Ole Opry, they did something radical and risky. They looked west. In the early 1950s, California was the new frontier, and it was booming. A massive second migration of Okies, Arkansans, and poor Southerners had flooded the Central Valley and the industrial suburbs of Los Angeles. They weren't fleeing the Dust Bowl this time. They were seeking high-paying jobs in the burgeoning post-war defense industry, the oil fields, and the massive agricultural empires. These newly affluent migrants brought money in their pockets and a burning nostalgic hunger for the sound of home. Nashville, at that exact moment, was beginning its famous flirtation with the Nashville sound, a move to smooth out the music, replacing fiddles and steel guitars with string sections and polite backing choruses, hoping to cross over to the pop charts. But the working-class migrants in California's oil patches and factories didn't want polish. They wanted the raw, loud, gritty, electrified sound of the bars and dance halls. They wanted honky-tonk. Joe and Rose Lee saw the opening. They packed their bags, drove right past Nashville, and landed directly in the epicenter of this raw, emerging scene, Los Angeles. If Nashville had the Grand Ole Opry, California had its own answer. And in many ways, it was bigger, wilder, less censored, and crucially, it was televised. It was called Town Hall Party, broadcast live on Saturday nights from a rambling, barn-like theater in the working-class suburb of Compton. Town Hall Party was everything the reverent church-like Opry was not. It was not formal. It was loud, chaotic, sweaty, and electric. This was where the amplified twang of Western swing smashed headlong into traditional hillbilly, and where the frantic, nervous energy of nascent rockabilly was being born. This was the incubator, the absolute epicenter of what the world would soon come to know as the Bakersfield Sound. Joe and Rose Lee didn't just guest star on Town Hall Party, they became the foundational pillars of the entire program. They were weekly regulars from 1953 until the show finally went off the air nearly a decade later. They were surrounded by a staggering cast of talent, all sharing the same stage on the same night. It was on this stage, broadcast live into living rooms across the entire western United States, that they were crowned. The show's promoter, William Wagnon Jr., gave them the moniker that would stick forever, Mr. and Mrs. Country Music. This weekly television exposure turned them into household names. They presented America with the absolute ideal of the country music couple. They were wholesome, they were family, but they could rock. They wore the fantastical, glittering, custom-made, perfectly matching nudie suits. And it was here that they debuted the song that would become their immortal legacy. It was called Dim Lights, Thick Smoke, and Loud, Loud Music. Co-written by Joe, this song is the perfect archetype, the defining thesis statement of the honky-tonk experience. It is not a sad sack lament about lost love. It is a defiant, joyful statement of rebellion, a celebration of finding salvation and release in a rowdy, forbidden, smoke-filled dive bar. It was the working-class anthem for Friday night, a 2-minute explosion of pent-up energy. When Joe sang the lead verse, it was good, but when Rose Lee's high, razor-sharp harmony vocal kicked in on the chorus, the song transformed. It became a desperate, primal wail, the unified sound of yearning and joyous release. The song became a massive hit and a standard of the genre. Their careers exploded. They recorded dozens of albums for Columbia and other major labels. There were the mind-bending instrumental albums designed to showcase Joe's otherworldly talent, on which Rose Lee held down the anchoring, flawless rhythm guitar. There were the beautiful gospel albums showcasing their pristine, tight vocal blend, reinforcing their wholesome family image and offsetting the sinful nature of their barroom hits. And there were the honky-tonk standards that helped define the entire sound of the West Coast. They toured relentlessly, becoming one of the most in-demand acts in the nation. Their image became iconic. Joe out front, wrestling with his astonishing white double-neck Maserati guitar, custom built by his friend Semmy Mosley, firing off cascades of notes that seemed to defy physics, and Rose Lee, ever present, anchored at his side, holding her acoustic guitar, playing that relentless, perfect boom-chuck rhythm, her head tilted back slightly as she delivered those piercing, perfect high notes. This is the image history froze in time. But this image, like all meticulously crafted public images, concealed a far more difficult, exhausting, and complex reality. While she was building this empire, while she was smiling under the hot television lights and helping to define a new genre of American music, Rose Lee was also working a second, entirely invisible and incredibly demanding job. She was a mother. They had 3 children. Jody, born in 1954, right at the start of their town hall party fame, Dale and Lori. And they did not raise these children on a quiet farm in Tennessee, shielded from the road. They raised them on the road. Rose Lee shattered that mold, but she did so at an immense personal cost. She refused to stay home. She was half of the act. So she brought the family with her. She raised 3 children on a tour bus, navigating the chaotic, transient, and often seedy world of a full-time musician, moving every day from town to town to town, dance hall to state fair. She wasn't just an instrumentalist. She was, in effect, the brand's visual manager. She had to manage the family, manage the children's needs, manage the wardrobe, and provide the essential emotional stability for her virtuoso husband and her road-weary kids. And then every single night, without fail or complaint, she had to step out of the bus, step into the blazing hot lights, strap on her guitar, and become the flawless, smiling, perfect Mrs. Country Music. She had to hit every note and never, ever miss a beat, all while her husband played the explosive star-making solos and soaked up the thunderous applause. This was not mere support. This was an invisible, grueling, relentless dual shift that lasted for decades. She wasn't just supporting his career. She was performing 2 full-time professional jobs simultaneously, one in the spotlight and one completely, totally in the shadow of the tour bus. It was a phenomenal act of emotional and physical endurance that history has almost universally ignored. Their performance dynamic itself was a master study in balance, and it is the absolute key to understanding her essential and critically overlooked musical contribution. Joe Maphis was the spectacle. He was the attraction. Audiences came to watch him play. He combined the complex thumb-picking style of Merle Travis with the lightning-fast flat picking of a bluegrass player, creating a rolling, layered cascade of sound that no one else could replicate. He was, without argument, an innovator, a genius. Musicians, producers, and critics who watched them perform night after night, year after year, all noted the exact same thing. Joe's eyes, during every performance, were almost always on Rose Lee. This wasn't just a romantic gaze of adoration. He was watching her right hand. She was the band's metronome. She was the timekeeper. While most honky-tonk bands came to rely on the heavy snare drum backbeat on the 2 and 4, the entire Maphis sound was anchored by the unwavering rhythm of Rose Lee's acoustic guitar. Her playing was famously described as being as steady as the tides. It never wavered, never sped up, never slowed down, regardless of the frantic complexity of what Joe was playing over the top of it. She was the brick wall he could lean against. She was the launch pad. Her steadiness gave him the absolute freedom to fly into his most complex improvisational musical territories, because he knew, with absolute unshakable faith, that she would be there, right on the beat, solid as bedrock, when he landed. If her rhythm had faltered for even a microsecond, the entire intricate, high-speed structure of his solos would have immediately collapsed into noise. She never faltered. Her second, and perhaps even greater artistic contribution, was her voice. In the Appalachian tradition from which she came, the high harmony is not just decoration. It is the emotional core. It is the lonesome in the high lonesome sound. It is the unresolved tension, the piercing cry, that gives the song its pain and its power. Rose Lee possessed one of the purest, strongest high harmonies in the business. It was sharp, precise, and completely devoid of the smooth, polished vibrato that Nashville was beginning to favor. It was a mountain sound, clear and powerful as a bell. When paired with Joe's folksy, comfortable baritone, it created the signature Maphis blend. Go back and listen to Dim Lights, Thick Smoke. Without her harmony, it is a good, solid barroom song. With her harmony, it becomes a standard, an agonizing, timeless anthem of defiance and despair. In the industry, they were famous for their utter professionalism. In the hard-living, hard-drinking, chaotic world of honky-tonk, a world defined by the tragic self-destruction of Hank Williams and the near misses of Johnny Cash, Joe and Rose Lee were the reliable ones. They were devout. They were family-focused. They showed up on time. They were sober. And they always delivered a flawless, high-energy show. But this very stability, this admirable lack of personal tragedy and public scandal, inadvertently contributed to her erasure. History loves a wreck. History loves a redemption story. They were the stable, happy couple. This image, while true, further cemented her public role as the dutiful, supportive wife, rather than the dynamic, complex, and struggling artist she actually was. Their superstar-level career continued through the 60s and 70s. Even as Town Hall Party ended and rock and roll, led by the Beatles, completely overtook the culture, they shifted their focus back to Nashville, becoming revered elder statespeople of the Grand Ole Opry. They served as mentors and guides to countless younger artists, including a young multi-instrumentalist they championed named Barbara Mandrell. But time and the hard decades on the road were catching up. In the mid-1980s, Joe's health, compromised by a lifetime of heavy smoking, began to fail. He was diagnosed with lung cancer. Joe Maphis, the king of the strings, died in June 1986. He was 64 years old. The music world rightfully mourned the loss of a titanic innovator. The sound of the white double-neck guitar finally went silent, and for Rose Lee Maphis, the act was over. After 34 continuous years of performing as one half of a single entity, her partner was gone. Her career, as the world knew it, ended that day. She was 63 years old, and she would go on to live for another 35 years, almost entirely in silence. When Joe died in 1986, the spotlight turned off for Rose Lee permanently. She largely retired from public performance, effectively ending her career. But her significance, her final historical consequence, was just beginning. For the next 3.5 decades, Rose Lee Maphis became something new. She became the custodian of the flame. She was not just the widow of the king of the strings, she was the living archive of their sound, their partnership, and their entire era. While the music industry she helped build moved on without her, she remained in Nashville, a quiet matriarch. She watched the raw Bakersfield sound she helped pioneer get smoothed out, polished, and replaced by the slick countrypolitan pop of the 80s. She watched Garth Brooks turn country music into stadium rock in the 90s. She lived through the pop crossover of Shania Twain and the rise of the bro country of the 21st century. Through all of it, she was a living link, the last matriarch holding the blueprints to the original honky-tonk sound. She managed their catalog. She was the one who accepted the awards on his behalf when he was posthumously inducted into various halls of fame as an instrumentalist. She became the primary source for historians and journalists writing books about him. Rose Lee Maphis' legacy is not just a small thing that history has overlooked, but an integral part of country music. She was not a mere backup singer, but a pioneer. She proved that a woman in country music could be both a talented performer and a solid pillar of support for her family on the road, a concept that would only become popular decades later. Musically, she was the foundation for her husband's West Coast guitar style. Without the steady, powerful rhythm she provided, Joe Maphis's lightning-fast solos would have been a jumbled mess. She was the straight line that allowed the Bakersfield sound to survive and thrive. While Joe Maphis is honored in the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame for his compositions, a place in the prestigious Country Music Hall of Fame has eluded both him and Rose Lee, a telling omission for one of the most important duos of the 20th century. She died peacefully, far from the spotlight. Her death in 2021, at the age of 98, barely received any national press attention, a mere footnote to a story written 35 years before her husband's death. But her legacy lives on, far from forgotten. When you listen to Joe and Rose Lee Maphis' recordings, focus on what's behind the frenetic guitars. You'll hear a steady heartbeat-like rhythm and a voice that's clear and authentic, holding the entire emotion of the song. That's Rose Lee Maphis. Rose Lee was never an accessory or a backing vocalist. She was the rhythm, the harmony, the anchor. She is the solid foundation that allows a talent to soar. She is the queen of music who makes an entire kingdom shine.